In November 1942, an armada of 850 Allied ships mounted the first amphibious landing of World War II. Here in North Africa, the Germans came up against a formidable American army and faced defeat for the first time. Heinz Aberger was a member of Rommel's Panzer Army Africa. This is where he would meet the enemy, on the battlefront. 1942, with the German military machine advancing across the globe unchecked, the Allies decide on a confrontation in French North Africa, where Field Marshal Erwin Rommel reigned supreme. Under the terms of its armistice with Germany, the Vichy French in Africa must fight off any such invasions or face retribution in France. The Allied objective is to block Axis occupation of these French territories and set up Allied bases for operations against Italy and Germany from the south. Called Operation Torch, it's the first major amphibious landing of World War II. In London, Lieutenant General Dwight D. Eisenhower supervises the complex arrangement of air, sea, and land forces. The landings are set for November 8th. Eisenhower decides to restrict the landings to Casablanca, Oran, and Algiers. A shortage of landing craft and aircraft carriers precludes a more extensive plan.
Many of the U.S. infantrymen which were in Operation Torch had been training since 1940. There were then large-scale amphibious exercises held on both the Pacific and Atlantic coast of the United States. This was all being improvised. No one really knew how to make a large-scale amphibious invasion, and especially one of the size of Operation Torch, where many of the troops would come not from a base in Europe, but direct from the United States.
The reason for Hitler's success in North Africa is the Panzer Corps, which had been formed 2 years earlier. At that time, Heinz Aberger is a non-commissioned officer in the Panzer Army.
Die Italiener hatten in September
1940, the Italians crossed the Egyptian border and they advanced about 80 kilometers into West Egypt. In December, the British went on the defensive under General Wavell. In a relatively short time, they broke through and threatened Tripoli. Hitler said we need to prevent an Axis member from an impending defeat, and he ordered the founding of the German Africa Corps. Later, we became an elite group. At the beginning, it was just normal soldiers who joined. We began the transfer to Naples and Brindisi, and from there we were shipped to Tripoli. We dreamed of palm trees and savannas, and we were deeply disappointed when we arrived in a landscape that consisted only of sand. Palms were a rarity and water was short. When there was water, it was salty. We had little opportunity to get rid of our disappointment because Rommel, who was named leader of the Africa Corps, immediately ordered the march to the east to prevent further advance of the British. After Rommel led a few surprise attacks, British General Wavell said, "He is sly as a fox and we have to watch out for him." And since that time he had the name the Desert Fox.
After controlling North Africa for 2 years, Rommel's crushing Panzer unit is in for a series of major losses. At the end of October, an armada of 350 warships and 500 transports secretly heads out to sea from various ports in the United States and Great Britain. Their rendezvous, a point 4,000 miles away off the North Africa coast.
Once at sea, the men were told their destination was French North Africa, and that they were hoping to land as liberators to the French and not as adversaries. Much of the education, there was talk on board ships about being good to the local people, much of which being very political correct, even tended to show the population of North Africa as being composed basically of saints and noble people. Some of this was indeed aimed at creating good results to the troops and preventing hostility from the local people.
In transit, the troops hear an important announcement on the loudspeaker system. They're told that British General Bernard Montgomery and his 8th Army have succeeded in breaking through the German lines at El Alamein. It's a huge victory for the Allies and a disastrous defeat for Rommel and his proud Afrika Korps. November 8, 1942, the American fleet sets off the coast of Africa. But the big question in everyone's mind is how much resistance will the French collaborationist army give them?
In Morocco, the U.S. encountered its strongest opposition. The French Navy, the battleship Jean Bart, engaged the U.S. Navy battleship Massachusetts. U.S. Navy dive bombers had to be used against French naval attacks. On the ground, French-Moroccan troops put up for several days very strong resistance against U.S. forces on the ground until an armistice could be agreed to. The U.S. troops which went into Operation Torch were all green. They had never seen action before, while the French which opposed them were relatively poorly equipped, not set up for modern warfare. In many places, they encountered very strong resistance from the French.